Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Aquarium. I'm Jerry Schubel, President. It's great to see all of you here this evening. If you would turn off your cell phones or put them on vibrate and refrain from texting for the next couple of hours, we would appreciate it. You're in the Aquarium's new Honda Pacific Visions Theater. This is the third class. For some of you, it's the first. It's the third class, though, in our Fall Aquatic Academy dealing with longevity. And for the first time, we have a partner, and our partner is Halbert Hargrove Global Advisors, a leading financial planning company that's located right here in Long Beach, and it's led by Russ Hill, Chairman and CEO, and Russ Hill has also been a leader in this aquarium since before the time it opened. He was on the original founding board, and he continues on the board to this day. We're living longer, healthier lives. And this gives us opportunities to add meaning to our lives and our legacies. The famous psychoanalyst, the late Erik Erikson, said, "I am what survives me." So it gives all of us opportunities to leave a legacy. Most of us aren't going to be able to leave a financial legacy, but there are other ways. And there are many people in this audience who are volunteers at the aquarium and staff members without whom this aquarium would not be anything like what it is today. In the Spring Aquatic Academy, we're going to be looking at the planet. The planet has a fever. The fever continues to go up, and the result of that fever is many ailments. And we know that the health of the planet has many effects on the health of we human beings. And we're going to explore the connections between the health of the planet and human health. And we already have two of the people lined up. We have a professor from Stanford, and we have one from the Bloomberg School of Public Health at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. But that's next spring. Tonight, it's all about longevity. And Russ Hill, please come up and take over.
There we go. Just as a little background. Before I start off, I just want to say a couple of housekeeping items, but I want to ask a question. How many people, is this your first of the sessions? So most of you come to at least one other, but not all. Okay. First off, at the end of this series, we'll have a written report on all four speakers, so you'll be able to catch up on that. And this evening, after our speaker ends with his prepared remarks, we'll have a Q&A session over here, so save up the really tough questions about projections into the future and what's going to happen. Our next and last session in this series will be how do we design and build the life we want. It's with Bill Burnett, who's the head of the design school at Stanford and was part of the Apple design team, and I think you'll find that very enjoyable. It actually worked. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. It actually worked this time. I've started each of the two prior sessions with this coin, the two-sided coin of longevity, and we know that part of longevity is about risk. We've talked about aging and paying for things as you go, and Steve will be covering some of that. But it's also about opportunities and all the things that we can do. So we started the series with Laura Carstensen, who talked about the new map of life. And for those who didn't see it, the idea is that we have to actually study and reinvent the map of life for the actual 100-year life that we think is going to be common. The second of our speakers, Don Ezra, had actually explored carefully his own life after full-time work, as he called it, and told us about that process. And what Don had done was very actively, Don had done it, actually pushed things in the right order. That would be one thing. Very actively decided to deal with his own longevity and think about what he wanted to be and how he wanted to live. And I think that was a great one. Because Don really understood life is really not about finding yourself. Life's about creating yourself. And the whole Aquatic Academy series here is about that very thing, changing the narrative, because most people don't have a narrative about longer lives to the extent they have when they think about aging. Steve and I were just talking, if you talk to anybody in the financial services business, when they talk about longevity, it means buy an annuity. That's not what we're talking about tonight. Increasing longevity greatly increases the number of outcomes you can have, whether they're health-related, life satisfaction, financial outcomes, and we have to incorporate that into our planning. Just as demography is not destiny, we know that most of what we do is based on our own behaviors. And for a lot of people in the room, you might be thinking, well, that's great for somebody who's 25 years old and starting out, but what if you're 70 and you have a 25-year life expectancy? Isn't that worth planning the rest of your life? We think it is. We all know these extra years of life need to be paid for, and Steve Vernon, our third speaker, covers that very well as talking about building your personal portfolio and all the non-monetary things that make life worth living. Steve is president of the Rest of Life Communications and is a research scholar at the Stanford Center on Longevity. And in those roles, he's really been looking at and researching and writing and speaking about all these challenging issues. You see his book, and if you didn't get one, please get one on the way out. If we don't have enough, we'll get them to you. It's one of many books he's published, but rather than go through all those, I'm going to introduce Steve Vernon and let him take it. Steve.
Well, thanks, Russ, and thanks for all of you for coming out tonight. We're living in the longevity revolution, and we're not really ready for it. I think that the implications of these longer lives that we've been given haven't really sunk in for individuals, for communities, for employers, and society at large. And so today I want to talk about one of those important implications is how do you live a long time without going broke? If you're in the audience and you're in your 50s or older, this is real for you. If you're under the 50s, then this is a preview of coming attractions. And it might also be issues that your parents or other relatives are struggling with, and you might be an important part of them addressing the challenges that I'll talk about today. So my goal today is not to tell you what to think about longevity issues, but I want to give you a lot to think about. Before we jump into the presentation, I do want to, again, thank you for coming out tonight. I want to thank Russ Hill and the Aquarium for sponsoring this series. And I'd also like to thank my cheering section who showed up today, my lovely wife, Melinda, our talented editor, Teresa Chula, and her husband, Jack Chula, and my nephew, James Vernon. And we're all proud of James. James is the water quality manager at the Port of Long Beach for the Environmental Planning Division. And what? Yay. Well, hold your applause because I'm about to give him applause again because James is proud because of the efforts of his group in coordination with the businesses and the agencies here in Long Beach. Sea life has returned to the harbor. Go, James. So back to the topic tonight. Let's start with a little healthy perspective. So how long did our ancestors live? And you don't have to go back too far. 2,000 years ago in ancient Rome, evolutionary speaking, that's the blink of an eye. People lived on average to age 22. Middle Ages in England, on average to age 33. And even in the 1800s in England and Wales, people are on average living about 41. And then at 1900 in the United States, people lived on average 47 years. Now, during all this period, we didn't worry too much about retirement. Basically, people worked up until they died. But then in just 50 years, by 1950, on average, people were living 68 years, and we added 20 years to life expectancy. And this is about the time when we started thinking about the concept of retirement, and that started to become a more widespread phenomenon among the population. And then by 2014, people are living on average to age 79. Now, I think this astonishing increase in life expectancy is one of humankind's greatest achievements. But we're worried about a so-called retirement crisis. We should be dancing in the streets, but a lot of us are worried about how we're going to pay for the rest of our lives. So this is really what I like to get working on. And actually, this is personal for me as well. I'm age 66, And it's sobering to realize, had I been born into the circumstances in Rome or in England and all that, I'd be dead by now. So I'm more than glad to just roll up my sleeves and work on this so-called retirement crisis. But here's some interesting things in the longevity sector is that the gains in life expectancy that we've seen up until now accrued broadly in the population. And it's due to things like abundant food, clean water, efficient waste disposal, vaccinations, electricity. We can owe these extra years of life more to our farmers and our plumbers and our garbage collectors than maybe the medical community. And so these gains accrued broadly across the population. But now there's a more disturbing trend going on. And we've all heard about the income inequality and the wealth inequality. Well, there's also a growing life expectancy inequality. And what we're seeing now is that the people who are continuing to achieve gains in life expectancy are the people who are in the upper half of the population, either with respect to income or education or wealth. Life expectancy gains are stalling in the bottom half of the population. And to me, from a social perspective, this is very disturbing. Now, at the Center on Longevity at Stanford, where we work, our motto is to help people arrive at old age financially secure, physically healthy, mentally sharp, and living independently. And I hope we can figure out ways for all the population to achieve those goals. And what we are learning is that to arrive at old age with those goals, you really need to start thinking and taking steps throughout your life course. And so for those of you who are under the age 50 group, taking some of the steps we'll talk about today will help you arrive at old age like we're describing. Now, longer lives aren't the only issues that we're worried about with respect to retirement. It's kind of sobering to realize that if you're going to live another 25 to 30 years in your retirement years, how many stock market crashes do we need to live through? You just look through the 30-year period from 1987 to 2017, and there were 4 stock market crashes. So from a financial perspective, this is something that we all are concerned about. Well, there's a lot of anxiety about retirement. Here's one of my favorite cartoons. It's a man in the water, and he's saying, "Help, I haven't saved enough for retirement." Even if he saved some money, he may not have saved enough for a long retirement. At the Center on Longevity, where I work, we recently published a study that looked at the assets and the debt of the baby boom generation as they're approaching retirement. And it's not a pretty picture. And I can say with confidence that the vast majority of older workers today, baby boomers, have not saved enough money to retire full-time at age 65 under their current standard of living. Let me repeat that so it can sink in. The vast majority of older workers today have not saved enough money to retire full-time at age 65 under their current standard of living. So what they'll have to do is either work longer or reduce their standard of living or some kind of a combination. Now, these aren't easy issues. These are tough issues that we'll have to grapple with. And so that's the area that we work in. Because I think the best thing to do to address these issues is to plan and just face up to what the challenges that you have and take steps to address them. Just to give you a little more background on my history, I worked as a consulting actuary in retirement plans for over 30 years. And I was on the front lines of the transition from defined benefit to defined contribution plans, 401k plans, that's the jargon in my business. And all along I was a little concerned about how are individuals who are not actuaries, investment managers, going to deal with that responsibility that was put on them to figure out how to fund their own retirement. So I started writing books, Don't Work Forever, Live Long and Prosper. My wife and I created a DVD called The Quest, and actually we interviewed a number of experts in these fields, and I'm going to bring a few of them in the office, not in the office, in the audience here today. Recession-proof your retirement years. We started writing for CBS Money Watch, and since then I've written over 1,000 posts on retirement issues. I say that not to brag, but just to say I've given a lot of thought to retirement. Money for Life, and now I'm working at the Stanford Center on Longevity for over 6 years now. So virtually all of my professional life, I've been thinking and studying about retirement, and now it's our turn. And so a lot of the strategies I'll talk about today are actually things that my wife and I are doing for ourselves. You all have copies of my latest book, Retirement Game Changers, Strategies for a Financially Secure, Healthy, and Fulfilling Long Life. And what this book does is it focuses on the series of decisions that older people face as they transition from the workplace into retirement. And these decisions are much more complicated and have much higher stakes than the saving and investing decisions you've been making along the way. And so I wanted to write about how all these decisions that you face so that people can make informed decisions. So I'll share some of the highlights of the book in here today. Hopefully this book, I'll inspire you to go read it at home and maybe incorporate some steps that will improve your life. Along the way, we'll have some fun, retirement planning tips from your dog. So one of the first steps I want to share is that it's not easy. Nobody said that it would be easy to live another 20 or 30 years in retirement, and nobody really said it'd be a good idea to wing it. And so one of the first steps I like to say is that it's your new job to take the same kind of dedication you might have taken for your career and take some of that. You don't have to take all the time, but take some of that to focus on what are these key decisions that you need to make as you transition into retirement. Now, there are a lot of challenges that we're facing. We don't know how long we're going to live. We don't know how long we'll be healthy. We don't know how long we can work. We don't know what the stock market's going to do. We don't know how inflation will be. But in spite of all these challenges, we've got to move ahead and make some decisions. And so the best advice I can offer is that we need to make decisions under the best circumstances that we know, the best information, and then be prepared to change your plan. Because if you're going to live another 25 or 30 years, think how much in the last 25 and 30 years, think how much change we've had. I think we're going to have as much or more change in the next 25 or 30 years. And so we need to be aware of what's happening in the economy and society at large, and then be prepared to change our plans. So I said that I'd bring some more experts into the room. This first clip I'm going to play right now comes from an interview with John Robbins. Anybody know who John Robbins is? Not too many people. Anybody know what Baskin-Robbins is? So John Robbins is the son of Irving Robbins, and John was being groomed to be the CEO of Baskin-Robbins. And he indeed was integral to the business, but somewhere when John was in his late teens, early 20s, his uncle Butch Baskin, the other co-founder of Baskin-Robbins, dies of a heart attack at age 54. So John says to his dad, you know, Uncle Butch dying at age 54 have anything to do with eating too much ice cream? And his dad said, no, don't worry about it. But John Robbins did worry about it and actually ended up turning his back on becoming CEO of Baskin-Robbins and devoted his life to researching and writing and speaking on healthy living. So that's the introduction of John. Let me play the video clip for you. I spent an afternoon with John Robbins, author of Diet for a New America, which sold over 1 million copies. His latest book is Healthy at 100. Now the subtitle says it all: the scientifically proven secrets of the world's healthiest and longest lived peoples.
Well, I've seen people age different ways, and most of our viewers probably have too. I've seen people age and they grow bitter and they grow defeated and they get shut down and they're not healthy and they don't enjoy their later years. And they don't experience themselves as contributing to anybody or anything. Their heart doesn't really flower in their later years. And I've seen other people who go through whatever they go through as they get older. You know, they lose people, they maybe even lose spouses, but something in them keeps thriving through it all. And they become kind of luminous and they're models for me. And I've looked at such people and I thought, well, how is it that one person grows this way, another person grows this way? What are the choices along the way, or what are the beliefs or the attitudes or the decisions? Because I want to grow old and I want to help other people grow old with beauty and with joy and pleasure. I don't think that the cultural belief about aging, that it is necessarily decrepitude, that it is necessarily bad, I don't believe in that, actually. I challenge that. There's maturity, there's wisdom, there's understandings, there's perspectives that arrive in our later years if we're thoughtful about how we live and caring towards others and towards ourselves. that our society dearly needs, but we don't have access to it because we relegate oldsters into some kind of junk heap. I think that realizing that we've been sold something here, we've been sold a belief system about aging, and that's not only not in our best interests, but is untrue. And the way you challenge that is you see the people, you look for the people who are living fabulous lives, energetic lives, vibrant lives, creative lives, caring lives, making a contribution to their communities, to their families, to the greater good of society in countless ways, whatever age they are.
What I like about that video, a number of things I like, but at the end he's giving us a hint for how do we take into account these stories in our lives, and stories is a word for examples or narratives that we hear. What we're seeing at research at Stanford is that these stories that people have in their heads are powerful influences of their beliefs and their behaviors. And so he's saying the way you challenge these beliefs is to look for examples in your lives and try and emulate them. And so I want to talk a little bit about the power of stories because in my observation, this really can influence people's thinking. I spent an afternoon with John Robb. Let's go. There we go. So here's a story I hear at some of my workshops. None of the men in my family live past age 75. And they use this story as a rationale for making some short-sighted decisions. But then I heard this one. My neighbor's 97-year-old aunt ran out of money and had to move in with them. The aunt didn't think she would live that long. I'm just curious, let's just have a little audience interaction. How many people have older relatives who are struggling financially that you see? Okay. How many people have older friends and relatives who are thriving through it all and doing well? How many people raised your hand both times? And actually that was intentional. I just want to show you there's a range of possibilities out here. And so these stories, what John Robbins is suggesting is glom on to the positive stories. Maybe the stories that aren't so positive, glom onto them as an example of what not to do. Here's another one that I see. My mother died of cancer at age 54. Enjoy it while you can. You just don't know how long you will live. And so once again, this might create some fatalism about living a long time. I want to dig down on that. Let's talk about the impact of genes versus your environment and your longevity. How many think genes have more of an influence on how long you'll live than your lifestyle decisions? A couple folks, okay. How many think it's more your decisions, your lifestyle decisions? Okay, you've seen some of these talks before, I think. And actually, it's hard to pin it down, and it varies person by person because there are people who are truly dealt a bad deck of cards genetically, but for most people, and we have examples on the other extreme. We have Winston Churchill, who lived a long term, and he smoked and drank. These are the outliers, both on the good and the not so good side, but for the average folks, your lifestyle decisions have more of an impact than your genes. Both are important. We can't do much about the genes that we were born with, but we can impact our lifestyle decisions. Here's a quote from Jack Rowe, who's a respected researcher in the longevity area that I want to read to you. For all but the most strongly determined genetic diseases, the MacArthur studies show that the environment and lifestyle have a powerful impact on the likelihood of actually developing a disorder. This is wonderful news for individuals with strong family histories of some cancers, heart disease, hypertension, rheumatoid arthritis, and many other conditions. We now know that diet, exercise, and even medications may delay or completely eliminate the emergence of the disease. Because I love this phrase. This is wonderful news for individuals with strong family histories. This is saying is that your ancestors, that does not need to be your destiny. And actually, when I hear about these family histories, then I like to say, well, of the people, of the men that didn't live past age 75, how many smoked? How many were overweight? How many were in dangerous occupations? How similar is their life to your life? Because actually what you might be inheriting might be their behaviors rather than their genes. So I think one of the goals or tasks in planning for the rest of your life would be actually to estimate what your life expectancy might be. And so there are some websites out there where you can enter answers to a couple questions, and it might tell you how long you might live, and that actually can put a different perspective on your life. I know the woman who said that her mother died of cancer at age 54. She wasn't planning for a long retirement. I said, go do one of these life expectancy calculations. Because I knew her history. She was focused on that big example for her, but the rest of the people in her family lived into the 80s and 90s. So she did it, and it said she might live to 94. She didn't believe it, so she did the other one. It said she might live to 93. And that put a whole nother outlook on her life. She figured, I better start planning to live a long time. This is the story I hope to prevent. If we knew we would live this long, we would have planned better. So speaking of planning, here's another one of my favorite cartoons. It's a man who's doing some planning. He's got his laptop and he's addressing his wife. And he says, if we take late retirement and early death, we'll just squeak by. At least he's planning. I hope to share a better plan. And one of the first parts of planning is to extend your planning horizon. While you're working, often all you need to do is get that paycheck, meet your bills. Maybe you're setting aside some money from your 401k to save for retirement. But really, you don't need to think too far down the road. But as you're getting into your 50s and 60s, you really need to extend your planning horizon all the way to the end of your life. And so it's just going to take a little different thinking. So I want to start digging into some more details, and I want to start with just an overall framework for how to think about the arc of life. So when you think about the 20th century was the century when retirement was invented, and you generally had these three phases in life. First phase, childhood, education, early adulthood, middle age, career and family, and then we had retirement. Now, the problem with these extra years of life is we kept adding it on to that retirement phase. And eventually, something's got to give. We just can't keep adding these extra years of life into the retirement box. My mother ended up living to age 92. 31 of those years were in retirement. And while I think that was wonderful for her, and she was lucky enough to be married to my father who had a nice pension plan, for the vast majority of people, that is a long time to finance your retirement. Now, I've heard some people in our business say we need to do away with the concept of retirement because we're living longer, healthier lives. And I want to take a little bit of a disagreement with that thought. And I really want to look at what I think is the 21st century arc of life. I think what we've done with these extra years of life is really what we've done is we've inserted this second middle age. Might start somewhere in your mid-50s and go somewhere through your mid-70s. But this is a period of life where maybe if you have children and families, they've moved out of the house. Maybe you're not quite as focused on your career as you were during your first middle age. But you're still active and you're still vital and you can still work if you need to. But no matter how vital and healthy we might be in this second middle age, I also contend there's going to be a period in your life where you're increasingly frail, less able to work or not able to work at all or not willing to work, and you'll be increasingly dependent on others for your support. And maybe we'll still call that retirement. And so I think as you're in your 50s and you're thinking about retirement, I would encourage you, are you really thinking about retirement or are you thinking about this second middle age? Because when I hear people say we need to do away with the concept of retirement, I think, I think you're really thinking about what I'm calling the second middle age. Now this idea doesn't work for everybody, so I encourage you to think it over and see if it works for you. I'll tell you a story. I was talking about this idea with a couple people. And one woman was in her late 40s, and her reaction was, second middle age? My first middle age sucks. Why would I want a second one? I knew her circumstances. She was that classic sandwich situation, teenage kids in the house, dependent older parents, and that is a time that's very stressful. I say to her, though, you know how this is going to end because you want to get through this age, and it ends with Your children move out and your parents pass away, and then you're going to be a little bittersweet memory there. Now, right next to her was a guy who was in his 60s, and he goes, this is a great idea. I'm not old, I'm in my second middle age. So really, I think it depends on your viewpoint, but I do want to say this, is that for those of us who have helped their parents through the ends of their life, we know that they increasingly dependent on their family to just guide them through that phase in their life. And so I think that, in addition, that's something we need to plan for. Most of the time we focus on the positive aspects of living longer lives and all the wonderful things we're going to do in our 60s and 70s and 80s, but don't lose sight as we do need to also make decisions that will help us go all the way to the end. And actually is one of the best things you can do for your adult children to help them set the plans in place so that they can also help you through the end of your life. So let's get a little more detail. The top financial decisions that we face, and the number one is when and how to retire. By how to retire, I mean, are you going to work part-time for a while, or are you just going to retire full-time? Closely followed behind that is when to start Social Security benefits, building your retirement income portfolio with savings, and if you're lucky, you have a traditional pension. This is the one decision here that involves investing. And too often we confuse investing advice with planning advice. And I'll just encourage you, if you really need a planner, investing is important, but you need someone who can do investing and planning for you. Fourth decision, make smart choices for medical insurance and Medicare, because in this country, you can really get hammered if you don't have the proper protection. And then finally, which living expenses to reduce. And this follows up what I was saying earlier, is the vast majority of older workers are going to have to work longer or reduce their standard of living. This is just the top 5 decisions. Let's keep going. Whether to deploy home equity. Particularly in California, a lot of people have more wealth in their home than they do in their 401k plan. And so how you might use that wealth is an important decision. Protecting against long-term care expenses. How many of you have had this situation with your older parents where you've seen them incur expenses and need a lot of care? My wife and I have, for all of our parents, we had to guide them through that issue. And what that said to us is that we want to set in place some plans so that we're not going to be a burden on our children. Protecting against financial fraud and abuse. This is one of the specialties at the Center on Longevity where I work, and it's heartbreaking to hear the stories of older people who are losing all their savings. And the reason they're losing them is that they are targets to the scammers. And so part of your thinking as you transition to retirement is, how am I going to protect myself, not only now, but maybe in my 80s when I'm not quite as sharp as I used to be with respect to financial management. These are decisions that we want to think about as we go into retirement. Providing for your spouse after you're gone. If you're married, I can predict as an actuary that one of you will die first. So it's not being morbid, it's just inevitable, and you want to make sure your spouse is going to be fine after you're gone. And then finally, if you want to leave a legacy, there's some planning there. So this is why I say the decisions are more complex and they have higher stakes. And I say this not to intimidate you, it's just, I say this to help motivate you to spend the time it takes to make good decisions. Now, I want to move on to a topic. I want to disparage a concept that I hear. Some people say, oh, if I only had $1 million, I could retire, or $2 million. They have this magic number in mind. And I really don't like the concept of a magic number because it really doesn't give you any guidance on how to manage your finances. Now, I do want to ask a question, shout out answers. If you had all the money you needed, what would that get for you? What? Comfort, security, freedom. No more working. More money for the aquarium. Hey. A basis to plan with. Okay, so thank you for just shouting out these answers. Some of the things I was looking for were freedom, not worrying about your life. So instead of having a magic number, I like to talk about the magic formula for retirement income security. And here it is, I greater than E. You want to have your income greater than your living expenses, And now you got to make that happen throughout the rest of your life. Now, for those of you who are mathematicians, I have to tell kind of a cute story. I go around giving retirement planning workshops, and one time I was giving a workshop literally to a bunch of rocket scientists down in Southern California. And they said that's not a magic formula, that's an inequality. But somehow the magic inequality for retirement security doesn't really have that ring. So let me just look at an example. Suppose you have, in this I greater than E, suppose you have income of $100,000 per year and you have expenses of $110,000 per year. Are you worry-free? No. But suppose you have income of $80,000 per year and you have expenses of $70,000 per year. Who is richer? I contend that the second group, even though they have less income, is richer than that first group because they have freedom, they have lack of stress, and this is illustrating what I think is the magic formula for retirement income security. Another thing we worry about is stock market volatility. And it's a valid concern. You're at that stage of life where if the market goes down, you might think you can't go back to work and recover your losses. And so I want to give you a framework for thinking about managing your finances that will help protect you against stock market volatility. That's what I call the 21st century retirement income portfolio. And it goes like this: set up retirement paychecks. These are checks that you can depend on. They are paid for the rest of your life. They don't go down if the stock market crashes. And as much as possible, cover your basic living expenses with these paychecks. The roof over your head, food, utilities, medical premiums. Then if the stock market crashes, you don't have to worry about having to move in with the kids. Retirement bonuses, those are sources of income that might go up if things are going well, but they might go down if things aren't going so well. And as much as possible, cover your discretionary living expenses, hobbies, travel, spoiling the grandkids. These are expenses that you could reduce in theory if the stock market isn't doing well without having to move in with the kids. And then finally, you have a cash stash or an emergency fund, and that's money to pay for unexpected expenses. And you don't have to dip into the money that's generating your retirement paychecks or retirement bonuses. Now, this actually mimics the way a lot of people manage their finances during their working years, because a lot of you might have had regular paychecks. You might have had either bonuses or overtime that came in when times were good and maybe went down when times weren't so good, and you might have had an emergency fund. So if these are lifelong habits that you relied on when you were working, just keep those good habits into your retirement. Just to get a little specific, sources of income. Paychecks would be Social Security, pensions, annuities, and now there's a new possibility, 10-year payments from reverse mortgages. Bonuses would be withdrawing from invested assets, working for a while, and some people have other sources such as rental income. The point we're trying to make is there's not going to be one single magic bullet. We've got to piece it all together. So I want to get a little more detailed now, and I want to talk about something that we developed at the Stanford Center on Longevity called the Spend Safely in Retirement Strategy. And what this was a strategy that anybody could use in any IRA or 401k plan to generate retirement income. Because that's one of the biggest challenges today in the retirement business is how do workers who don't have any pension, how do they manage their 401k account and their IRAs to last the rest of their life? And so this really has two steps. Step one is to optimize your Social Security, and you do that by having a careful strategy to delay the start of your benefits. Because Social Security, for most people, is the biggest source of retirement income, and it's also the best Social Security, the best source of income to protect against common risks. It's paid for the rest of your life, no matter how long you live. It's increased for inflation. It doesn't go down when the stock market crashes. So it only makes sense to make that as big as possible. And most people can do that by some kind of a strategy to delay the start of benefits. Step two, create bonuses. And you can use something called the IRS required minimum distribution. I don't want to get into details because that's kind of a technical topic. But basically, any IRA or 401k provider can pay out this RMD, or required minimum distribution, coupled with a low-cost target date fund or a balanced fund or a stock index fund. These are all tools in most IRA or 401k plans. Now, this is just a baseline strategy. We looked at 292 different retirement income strategies using very sophisticated analytical tools, and this strategy came out looking actually pretty good compared to much more complex strategies. I suggest this as a baseline, and then if you want to personalize it to your own circumstances, or if you find certain features of this not to your liking, good for you, because now you're giving some thought into how you want to build your retirement income portfolio. I wanted to go into sources of expenses because when I give my retirement planning workshops and I talk about this I greater than E, and I talk about how we might have to reduce our living expenses, and so we ask people, how might you go about reducing your living expenses? Well, actually, the average American's budget comes from housing, health, food, transportation, entertainment. But when I ask people, what living expenses might you reduce, I hear people say, oh, I'll cut out cable TV, and we won't go to Starbucks as much, and we won't eat out as much. And those are indeed good steps to take. But if you've got a big gap, that's not going to cut it. And so the number one expense for most retirees is still housing. And so this is where you might have a win-win opportunity to downsize your house, but you also might want to find a place that might better support this phase of your life. Because that house in the suburbs that might have been a good place to raise children and a family and then commute to work, in your later years might be isolating. And it's less and less supportive of this phase in life. And so what I encourage people to do is think about a house that is just enough to meet their needs and what might make them happy. This leads us to our first retirement planning tip from our dogs. If you downsize your dog and put them in a smaller doghouse, they're still happy. They find a way to be happy with whatever they've got. I want to go into an example which shows the power of that first decision, when and how to retire. And so we're going to look at a hypothetical couple, Jack and Teresa. Both are age 60. They both work. Their household income is $100,000 per year. They have $350,000 in retirement savings, no pension. And by the way, this is much higher than the median or average savings of someone in their 60s. And they're thinking of, can they retire at 62 or 66 or 70? I'm going to show you the kind of analysis that I hope people will do either for themselves or hire an advisor to help them with, to help them make this decision. So we're going to look at some baseline scenarios. One is they're currently age 60, but they work full-time to age 62, and then immediately they start their Social Security and drawing down their savings. Scenario 2, they work part-time from age 60 to 65. They don't contribute anymore to their 401k plan, but they're just working just enough to delay starting Social Security until age 66. Then they start drawing down their savings. Scenario 3, working full-time, continuing to contribute to their 401k plan, and then they retire at 66. Scenario 4, a downshifting strategy from 60 to 70, and then they delay and everything until age 70. And then finally, scenario 5, working full-time from 60 to 70. Then they start Social Security and drawing down their savings. This graph represents the significant increase in their retirement income if they delay their retirement even for a few years. So look, we're starting at age 62, $42,000 and change is their annual retirement income. $73,000 if they wait till age 70. Almost, not quite, but almost doubling the amount of retirement income they might have. And then it's in between if they work in some way until their 60s, mid-60s. So there are other factors that go into people's decision to retire, like their health, their desire for retirement freedom. This isn't the only consideration, but at least I want people to understand the consequences of their decisions. I also want to point out, look at scenarios 2 and 3. They aren't that much different. Remember, scenario 2 was working part-time from 60 to 66. Scenario 3 was working full-time from 60 to 66. Because when I tell people that you might have to work longer, often I hear this groan, I can't work any longer, I don't want to work longer. Well, I contend maybe you might need to for financial reasons, but you just don't want to work in the same way or the same intensity that you did during your middle age. And so I put out a downshifting strategy as something that might work for folks who want to delay taking down Social Security and delay drawing down their savings. They might need that extra money to enable that delay, but they just don't need to work at that same source of intensity. Now, this just shows the dollar amounts of their retirement income. Let's express it as a percent of their pay, because retirement advisors often give this conventional wisdom that you need a retirement income equal to 70 to 80% of your pay just before you retired. And what we're seeing is that the vast majority of Americans are not going to hit that goal. It makes me frustrated when I hear retirement planners advocate that, because I say, stop it. Most people can't get there. They're going to have to learn somehow how to live on less income. And this is showing what I was saying is that Jack and Teresa in this example don't hit that goal unless they work in some way until age 70. So what are the levers that Jack and Teresa have to them? They can work longer, they can reduce their spending, they can make smart financial decisions to squeeze as much money as they can out of their resources, and maybe they might need to deploy home equity. These are not easy decisions, and this is why it takes some time to think through this, and why it might also take some time to find an advisor who's going to help you think through these issues. Now, I want to go down a path a little bit on investing, because a lot of people get really focused on investing in retirement. But I want to come back to this graph that I was showing you earlier. How much of your retirement income is subjected to investment risk? So this is that same graph. The blue part is covered by Social Security, and it is protected from any investing risk. And any investing risk that you're taking is coming from that red part. It's less than half of your retirement income. And that says to me, at least, that maybe you can take some risk in retirement by investing in the stock market. Because think about it, if you're going to be alive for another 20 or 25 years, you have time to ride out the stock market declines that are inevitable. So let's take a look at stock market returns. This is one of my favorite graphs. It shows the stock market return as a percent basis since 1926. Every bar going up is a year when the market made money, and every bar going down is when the market lost money. You'll see that there are way more up bars than there are down bars, 68 up years, 25 down years. To me, this is a good representation of what happens if you invest in the stock market, is that most of the time, but not always, you're going to make some good money. And that is the dilemma that most people face as they think about investing in retirement. They hate the idea of losing money, but most of the time they would make money if they would invest in the market. Let's take these percentages and now translate it to what it might look like for someone in retirement. And so here's another chart. It looks complicated. Let me just walk you through it. The lines are representing the patterns of retirement income over someone's retirement. The horizontal axis is every year of retirement between age 65 and 95. The vertical axis is the amount of retirement income that you're getting. And what we're saying is someone who started with $400,000 at age 65, and they used this IRS required minimum distribution to calculate their annual retirement bonus, what would that look like over the progression of their retirement? This is for someone who retired at age 65 in 1988. And that green line represents if they had invested all of their savings in the stock market. Now you'll see that the amounts are higher, in some cases much higher than the other lines. The blue lines is if they had a 50-50 portfolio, stocks and intermediate government bonds. The black line is the line for bonds, if 100% of their assets were invested there. And then the red line is if they just took their starting amount at age 65 and just applied inflation to it. Now, a lot of people, I'm seeing if this is going to work for me. All right, I have this fancy clicker that isn't working with the system. I was going to focus in on this green line, this precipitous decline you see. That's the stock market bubble burst in the tech bubble bursting in 2000, 2001, 2002. The other precipitous decline is the financial crisis in 2008. People get focused on those precipitous declines, and they are indeed scary when you're in the middle of it. But look, they ended still higher than the other lines if you were less invested in stocks. And this is why I like to think I want to invest money in the stock market that I can afford to lose. I can afford to reduce my living expenses that are covered by these investments. Because I would actually rather experience this precipitous decline and still be higher than where I would have been had I been more conservatively invested all along. But I acknowledge that a lot of people don't like that rocky ride, and that blue line, which represents a 50-50 portfolio, it's smoother, it's still higher than all government bonds, and so that can be a nice compromise for people who want to balance growth with protecting themselves from the downside. This is just one chart of a number of charts that we prepared, and some of them, actually most of them look something like this. A few of them don't. If you had retired in 1928 or 1929 or in the mid-60s, you would see a completely different story. And that comes back to most of the time, but not always, you'll do better in the stock market. In fact, this is one of the more recent ones. Suppose you retired in 2008, just before the financial crisis. And this really shows that you really didn't catch up until about 6 years later. But that's not a very long time to have to wait. And after 6 years, then all of a sudden the market now is doing a lot better for you. So I think this represents a big planning challenge that you really need to think through when you're planning for your retirement. This leads me to the next tip from your dog. Dogs are patient. They wait for their rewards. And so, again, think like your dog. Well, let's keep going. To manage that magic formula that I greater than E, you might conclude that you need to work longer. And I think there are actually a lot of benefits to working longer. When you look at the 20th century career trajectory, it'll often look like this, where you worked full time, you kept getting raises, and at some point you reached the end, and then you retired full time. There's a lot more interest now in the 21st century career trajectory, where you're working for a while and then you start tapering off, but you work longer in your life. And so this is a new life course that I'm encouraging you to think about. And more workers today are reporting that they would like to work longer into their lives, but they just want to work differently. For those of you who are younger here, this is also a lesson to be learned, is that when you start getting into your peak earning years, don't assume that's going to continue indefinitely. Because what I can see, when you look at the mistakes that a lot of the boomers made, is that they kept upgrading their house, and every 5 or 10 years they bought a bigger house, and they refinanced, and they got another 30-year mortgage. And maybe they paid too much for college education for their kids. And now they're approaching their retirement years with 25 years left on a 30-year mortgage, and a lot of debt, and not a lot of savings. And so what that says to me, if I had to do it over again, if I was someone in that position in their 30s, I would think, you know, I'm going to have some peak earning years, but those are not the years to buy cars every couple years, to keep upgrading your house, because I'm going to need that money later on. So how can you continue earning? You can keep working at your current job if you like it, and your employer likes you. You can do a bridge job where you work part-time for a while until a specified retirement age. You can do an Encore Career where you're taking your skills that you had throughout your career, but you go off in a different direction. That's what I happen to be doing. You can do gig work. You can start a business. There are a number of ways that you can continue working. Now, the first objection I hear to this idea of working longer is, are you healthy enough to work? And this represents a big dilemma for individuals and society. And so here's a graph which shows what proportion of older people report that they're in excellent health. People in their 60s and 70s, and under half of these folks are saying that they are in excellent health. But then you ask them, are you healthy enough to work? And very high percentages, in the 90s, even into your 60s and 70s, very high percentages of people are saying that they are healthy enough to work. This, to me, creates a challenge and a dilemma, is that how can employers and individuals support and accommodate their desire to keep working, but their health isn't quite as good as it used to be. This leads us to more tips from your dog. Dogs have duties around the house. They guard the house. They play with the family. And even some dogs are service dogs. Now, it's hard to imagine dogs hitting some age and say, okay, I'm done. I'm just going to the doghouse, and I'm not going to do what I used to do anymore. Dogs keep doing whatever their aging bodies allow them to do. And if those of you who have had dogs live with you throughout their entire lives, you know that they just keep doing whatever they can do, but they just phase down. And maybe that might be a more natural transition for humans as well. I want to tell another story. One day my wife and I were having breakfast, and she was reading a newspaper, and I was reading my favorite mortality table. And I came across this study. What are the odds that a retired man will die in a year? And these are the odds, the odds that someone who's the odds of dying is just what are the percent chance in a year of passing away. This is for retirees, and then this graph is for people who are working at the same ages. And I thought, that's kind of odd. Why are workers dying at slower or lower rates than retirees? Here's the same chart for women, and it's even more extreme. Here's the death rates for older women who are retired, and here are the death rates for women who are working. I thought, what's going on? I thought retirement was supposed to be good for you. And this begs the question, is this causation or correlation? These are the kinds of things that fascinate longevity researchers like myself. Because if we could think that actually working longer would cause you to be healthier and live longer, that'd be pretty powerful. Actually, it's not so simple. And for example, is the correlation the other way around? It's the healthy people who are able to work. And so it's hard to imagine doing an experiment that would demonstrate this conclusively, because you'd have to take one group of people and say, you guys are going to retire and take cruises and play golf, and you guys over here are going to work for 20 more years, and we're going to measure the difference in your mortality rates. But curious scientists have done this experiment with dogs. And actually, again, it's not conclusive, but it's kind of leaning towards that causation. Now, we know a researcher who used to work at the Stanford Center on Longevity, Dawn Carr, who's now at the University of Florida. And she actually does dig into this issue of, does working longer help or hurt your health? And it's fascinating to me, intense research that actually supports what our grandmas might have told us. It turns out that good work is good for your health and longevity, and bad work is bad for your health and longevity. What is good work? Well, it's work where you're not physically in danger, it's less stress, you enjoy going to work, you enjoy your work companions. Bad work is physically unhealthy, maybe it's very stressful, you've got long commutes. And so it really kind of gets at what kind of work are you doing. So let me start wrapping up at least my prepared remarks. I do want to talk about an important decision. I think protecting against high medical costs and long-term care, I call that the big bad wolf of retirement. And I purposely draw on that nursery fable. We all know about the three little pigs, and the first two pigs didn't prepare for that big bad wolf. And we all know their sad fate. Only that third pig took the time to prepare for the big bad wolf. And so decisions that you'll make with regard to medical insurance, Medicare, and also eventually long-term care, these are an important decision. I don't have time to go into it tonight, but there is a chapter in the book that you all have. And so I just encourage you, the time you'll spend on these decisions will help keep you alive, particularly in your later years. Now, I've been talking about finances up till now. I just want to quickly talk about something called your life portfolio, because I think your life portfolio is just as important as your finances. And I divide that into health, what you do with your time, either working or volunteering, the people that you surround yourselves with, and your community. And these all work together. Particularly, I want to talk about these last two, the community and the people you surround yourselves with. And what we see is that people who age well into their later years, they actually have a convoy of support. And I mentioned earlier that as you get in your later years, you're more and more dependent on others for your well-being. And so I think consciously being aware of building this convoy of support is part of the planning. And for those of you who are younger, you might be part of that convoy that's helping your older parents or your older relatives. And to me, this is just an important part of aging in America today. I want to dig down into the health bit because I think that's what a lot of people are interested in. And I've got some ideas to share, but first I want to play another video clip for you. No need to introduce this, I'm just gonna play it.
It is interesting for people to know that one of the fastest growing groups of centenarians, people 100 years and older. And the fact of the matter is that centenarians should live a happy, healthy, vibrant life. There's documentation about that everywhere. There are societies like that everywhere, provided we have a lifestyle that supports that, where we live a life of health and vibrancy and well-being and movement and great nutrition and great alignment.
That was a paid gig for her. She was still working. Now, it's an interesting story. I play this a lot at my retirement planning workshops, and I finish it. And when I started playing this many years ago, she was still alive, but she ended up passing away at age 105. Her family was surprised. And I say surprised, I mean, it's not too surprising that someone 105 would pass away, but she just died one night without any obvious distress. And to me, that is the way to go.
It is interesting.
Oh, didn't want to do it. Sorry. So, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about steps you can take to improve your health. How many people think that nutrition is the most important thing to pay attention to for your health and longevity? A couple hands going up. How about exercise? Who wants to say exercise is more important? This is a trick question. How many want to say both? Let's take a look. Here's one quote I'd like to read from you. If exercise could be purchased in a pill, it'd be the single most widely prescribed and beneficial medicine in the nation. This comes from the founding director of the National Institute on Aging. But what kind of exercise is important? This institute is saying 4 kinds of exercise: cardio, strength, balance, and flexibility. Now, a lot of your exercises get more than one at a time, and so it's time now to be conscious, though, of what kind of exercise you're getting. There's also an important behavioral aspect to this, is that you really want to do exercise that you enjoy doing. Because if you think of exercise as a pill, as a medicine, you just got to go to the gym one more time to keep me healthy, if that's your only motivation, you're probably not going to last very long. And so it's important, most important, to look at exercise that might enjoy. So what can we learn from the dogs? Some dogs like to run. Some dogs like to swim. Some dogs do amazing things. But actually, what we can learn from the dogs is just moderate exercise. Taking a walk every day for 20 or 30 minutes a day can give you tremendous health benefits. And so what the research on exercise is showing is that exercising 3 or 4 times a week, anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes of moderate exercise, has tremendous benefits. To me, that's a very freeing conclusion because it lets us actually relax about exercising. Let's take a look at nutrition. Here's another quote from Dr. Michael Greger. Most deaths in the United States are preventable, and they're related to what we eat. Our diet is the #1 cause of premature death and the #1 cause of disability. Now, there's a lot of confusing information out there about proper nutrition. But actually, there's a lot of agreement among nutrition scientists about diet. And it really is more focusing in on what not to eat than what actually to eat. And so there's a lot of agreement that eating too much sugar, too much salt, too much high-processed foods, too much meat, and too much food, too much soda, that is actually, there's a lot of agreement on that. There's less agreement on, once you've eliminated those foods from your diet, what actually to eat. And actually there it's much more personalized. And so different foods work differently with different metabolism in different bodies. And so really what you want to do is go on a journey to see what are the kinds of foods that might work best for you. So what can we learn from our dogs on eating? Well, dogs give us a bad example because dogs will eat anything you put in front of them. They'll find their food any way they can get it. And actually, I think dogs need to be a little more discriminating about what they choose to eat. And so, like humans, we're going to have to be a little more discriminating. So let's start wrapping up some of the prepared remarks. You know, if I were to lower my voice and said I've got a secret for a long, healthy, financially secure life, would you kind of sit forward and pay attention? Well, what I'm talking about is a lot of work. And so finding ways to motivate yourself to take all these steps is really important. And so we really get interested on how people make decisions and what inspires them to take these steps. And so one research project at the Stanford Center on Longevity found that if people saw a picture of what they might look like as they get older, they're more likely to take care of that future person. So I dutifully tried this out on myself. I got a picture of myself. Here's what I looked like at 60. Here's what I look like at 70, 80, 90, and even 100. Now this works for me because I've got this on my desktop at work, and you know, it keeps me motivated. It doesn't work for everybody. I took a picture of my wife when I aged her, and she got mad at me. So there are other ways to motivate yourself. You can imagine what your future might be. You can also be conscious about the power of stories. I just want to make the point that in addition to all these strategies that I've been talking about, pay attention to motivating yourself to keep on track. So let me just wrap up. If you're in that first middle age, what are the action steps to think about? First of all, plan to live a long time. All the things I've been talking about, you might have to cycle through some careers, but think for the long term. Save and invest some money regularly. Be conscious about your spending, particularly as your children start approaching college years. That's one of the biggest danger points. Do they really need that private education, or can you really afford it? And make sure you take care of your health, because the action steps you take along the way are going to help you arrive at your older age healthy. If you're in that second middle age, now it gets more complex. You want to define your retirement. Are you going to work part-time for a while? Really think about your reasons for working versus not working. Take inventory of all your assets, because maybe you've got enough wealth in that home to help supplement your savings. Analyze how you're going to manage that I greater than E formula, and maybe you're going to investigate working longer. So what I'm going to do right now is play one more video clip, and then what I want to do is go into the Q&A. But don't go away, because I've got an inspiring finish after our Q&A. So let me play this video clip for you.
Plan, plan, plan. Life will be so good for you if you do.
Each of us has to walk each step of our path for ourselves and take each breath along the way for ourselves. And in that, there is the potential for something really wonderful to happen. But it's up to each of us to find that. And no one can do it for another person.
And I say that Americans are inventive, we're creative, and we're also resilient. And I think that just too many of us are obsessing about the number. And we ought to be obsessing about the life rather than the money.
And I didn't want to look back. I didn't want to look at myself in the mirror and say, you never even tried. You know, maybe you failed, but you never even tried. So that keeps me going.
So you can see I'm a big advocate of planning, and then be prepared to adjust your plan. So I want to
Plan.
Okay, now we're at Q&A and discussion. So, but again, don't go away. I want to handle as many questions as you have, but stick around for the finish. It'll be fun.
I'll just take this one, if I can get it off. Okay, is this live? Good deal. Okay, so now it's time for the tough questions. Give them a try. What do we have? Oh, come on. Right down here. You have a mic down here?
So the boomers are experiencing this unprecedented longevity, and somebody from the Generation X probably will live even longer due to advancements in medical science and everything that's been going on lately. I just wonder what somebody from my generation or the millennials generation can do, because this second middle age will probably be even longer for somebody of my generation. So I just curious about.
Well, and thanks for that question. That's an excellent thought. And a couple ideas. First of all, many of you might have some bad examples from your parents who are struggling. It's like, don't do what they did. And so taking care of your health is vital. Be prepared to work longer and maybe cycle through a couple different careers. I was mentioning earlier, being aware of your peak earnings time. Some people, they get a raise, they get a couple more raises. Oh, awesome, we can move into a bigger house. Get a couple more raises. Oh, awesome, I can move into a bigger house. And then they arrive in their 50s with this big house, another 20-year mortgage, and now what? So I think just being prepared for the long game and how you're going to need to be healthy, you need to renew your skills, your work skills, and be prepared to cycle through some different careers. Nurture that social portfolio, because you're going to need them later on. And I know this sounds like common sense, but it really is what's going to be needed.
Here we go.
Steve, you talked about delaying Social Security, maybe until your 70s, but we all hear that Social Security has funding issues and it might not be around for us. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Thank you. I was hoping someone would ask that question, because it gives me an opportunity to dispel some urban legends and some myths about Social Security. So we might have heard that the Social Security Trust Fund is going to be exhausted in 2035 or 34. And so I hear people say, get it while you can, or if you're younger, it's never going to be there for me. And I take the opportunity to dispel that notion whenever I can. I believe that as long as we have democracy, we're going to have Social Security. Now, it's going to change and morph like it has in the past, but it's going to be there for us. This thing with the Social Security Trust Fund, a lot of people think of it like a pension fund, and if the pension fund is exhausted, no more money can be paid. But that's not the case for Social Security. When you look at the benefits that are currently being paid to current retirees, 3/4 of those benefits are funded by taxes paid by existing workers. And only 1/4 of that benefit is paid by the trust fund. So the trust fund could be completely exhausted, and the worst that's going to happen is you'd get a 25% haircut in your benefit. Now that's bad news. I don't want to dispel that, but it's not zero. You're not going to get zero. I wrote some columns at my blog at Forbes this summer that actually said that even if you really believe that the benefits are going to be cut, which I don't. Politicians are loath to touch Social Security, so it's hard for me to imagine that they're going to let a 25% haircut go into place. But even if you were that cynical to believe that that would happen, it's still the best strategy to delay your benefit. Because if you're going to get a 25% haircut, would you get a 25% haircut on a bigger amount compared to a smaller amount? And you can't escape that haircut by taking Social Security early. And so I think there's a lot of misconceptions and urban legends out there about Social Security, and I take every opportunity I can to help dispel those myths. So thank you for that question.
Over here. Here we go.
Steve, you've pointed out to us that there are many advantages to working into your 60s and 70s, which is kind of looks like what you're doing and many of us here are doing. So what's been your experience, and what are the opportunities and challenges you've noticed?
Well, thanks for that, because I have considered that. I kind of consider us a one-rat experiment. And what I mean by that is that, I concluded early on I need to work longer, and I thought, well, it's not enough for me to just say to other people that you need to work longer. I need to do that for myself. And it is interesting to work at the Center on Longevity where I am. I'm reporting to people much younger than me. And I'm working alongside people even much, much younger than me. In one case, there's a woman who was 40 years younger than I am. She was brilliant with social media, did things that I couldn't possibly think of. And so I think just working alongside people of all ages and respecting them for their talents, and they respect me for the experience and talents I bring to it, I think that's part of it. And it's also part of this, you get to the later years, particularly if you've been in a job that had either executive responsibilities or managerial responsibilities, you're used to people doing stuff for you just because you tell them to. That doesn't work anymore. And you really need to actually be able to have people work with you and be influential rather than powerful and tell them what to do. And the last thought I want to share, I could go on this, but let me just share one last thought, is that I've got a good friend who's in her mid-70s, Anna Rappaport. She's one of the nation's foremost experts on aging and retirement. And she says, what's in your bio? Are you describing who you were or who you are? And she says, naturally, a bio will have a mix of both, but it should have more about what you're doing now rather than, oh, I was a vice president, or I was a this, or I was a that. What are you doing now? And so to me, those are some of the attitudes that I think you want to bring into your later years, because you're not going to be able to work as you were during your first middle age. So thank you. It gave me a chance to kind of expand on those thoughts.
Great. Here we go.
So back to Social Security. I've heard two schools of thought. One is to not delay taking your Social Security and taking the Social Security and investing that money. Then the other one was to delay it. And I'm at that age now where I'm deciding, do I take it, do I not take it? And if I delay it, the amount of money I get that for the next year is like $200 more. So are you better off to take it earlier, or are you a big proponent of not taking it? And why would I wait to get only $200 or $300 more in Social Security?
Thanks for that question, because I get that question frequently. First of all, for every year that you delay drawing down Social Security, you get an 8% jump in your benefit. And so, I can't tell you what your benefit is or not, like the $100 or $200 that you mentioned, but an 8% jump is a pretty big jump. So most people, if they delay taking Social Security, that will enable them to get more income over their lifetime. And that's my yardstick for determining a Social Security strategy, is how much income can you expect over your lifetime? And bigger is better. And so we can demonstrate actuarially that for most people, by delaying the start of their benefits, they will get more income over their lifetime. Now you raise another issue, taking it early and then investing it. And so I've done those kinds of calculations. First of all, assuming that you are going to take it early and you truly are going to invest it and not spend it. We have a family member who said, I'm going to take it early and I'm going to invest it. And then the first year she said, I'm going to invest it next year. This year I want to spend the money. But let's assume for a moment that you do have the discipline to take it early and not spend it and instead invest it. Is that a winning bet or not? And actually, you might win with that if you invest all of that money in the stock market. That's the only time you have a chance of making that a winning bet. If you bet money in bonds with that Social Security benefit, that's a losing bet. There's just no way in the world you're going to be able to catch up to what you would have had you delayed your Social Security. So I say to people who want to take their Social Security early and invest it, I'm going to say, then you got to go 100% in the stock market, and then you might have a 50-50 chance of breaking even on that one. And we all know what risks are in the stock market. To me, then, Social Security is part of that guaranteed benefit that enables me to take risks with my other savings. So that's my thoughts on your question. And thank you. Give me a chance to get out some key points.
Great. We have one right down here. to next.
The talk on retirement planning has centered on a couple, 2 people. Perhaps some of the planning should begin way earlier, in the 20s and 30s. The impact of family is tremendous on your savings and your ability to have retirement savings. Could you comment on that?
Well, what I'm going to say is easier said than done, but one of the best ways to have a secure retirement is to have a good job. To say kind of the obvious, is to make money that then you can save.
And fewer kids.
Well, I thank you for that one, because we have adult children who ask us, why should we have kids? And, my response is, if you have to think logically about having kids, that's not the right frame of mind. You just have to want to have kids. Because you can demonstrate mathematically that you're going to spend a lot of money on your kids, and you can convince yourself logically that you shouldn't have kids. And if everybody did that, that'd be pretty bad for the species. And so I think that having children is just part of the human experience for people who make that choice. And it probably is the case if you took 2 people side by side, or 2 couples, whatever you want to say, one had kids and one didn't, and you looked at their ability to save. Yes, it's going to be harder to save if you have kids. There's just no getting around that. Now, in your later years, kids might come in handy, particularly when you get into those frail years. And that's what I worry about when I look at my parents and their progression through their lives and other people. The people who have family in their lives close by them who love them and care for them, they're the ones, the older people, that are doing well. And that does worry me about people who don't have kids. They're going to have to be more conscious about building that convoy of support. I talked about that. I think that's critical. And for those people who have family, children, that convoy of support is somewhat built in, not completely, as we all know, but at least you've got the kids there that might be a source of help. You'll have to be more conscious about that if you don't have children. So it's not, to me, it comes back to, if I were just a younger person deciding whether or not to have kids, I wouldn't think too much logically about it. I'd want to make sure I could support them, but you just gotta want to have kids. Those are the ones that are going to do the best with having children. I hope that helps answer your question. Well, and that is absolutely the case, that that families right now are struggling. The economy isn't as good with respect to jobs. I'm not trying to paint a glossy picture. That is the challenge that we're facing, particularly older folks, particularly in California. People, my wife and I are contemporaries. One of the things we lament is that one of the biggest exports of California is our children, because they can't afford to live here. And so, yeah, these are challenges that we all face. And this is an opportunity, if you're fortunate enough to get into arrive at old age financially secure, physically healthy, and mentally sharp, you might be in a position to also help your adult children along the way. And so I think there's just going to be beneficial, the support goes both ways throughout with the family members, because I think people of all ages are facing big challenges, and we need to band together and help each other out.
I wanted to ask a question that has to do with like a variation in the life arc. During the 1990s, I noticed something was interesting. The economy was going up, the employment rates, people were getting employed in better ways, that was going up. Yet, at the same time, after the passage of the American with Disabilities Act, the unemployment rate for people with disabilities, that went up opposite direction. And from what I've seen since then, I suspect that it's still fairly high. So if you're living with a lifelong disability, which means work could be sporadic, not always very reliable, or non-existent because you get discriminated against or whatever, what do you suggest? I mean, are there other ways you can make up for it, or can you, or what else would you talk about doing?
Okay, well, thank you. That illustrates one of the toughest questions we have about aging today. People who have disabilities, our country doesn't take very good care of them. And that to me is a shame. When you look at what happens with pension plans, the disability plans, there's kind of a gap there. So I'm not going to sugarcoat that. That's a tough situation. And the answers are going to sound like easier said than done. That's common sense. I mean, I was showing that graph that showed the percent of people who are healthy enough to work. Some people with some moderate disabilities are still healthy enough to work in some way. They are being discriminated against. How do we accommodate that? I think that's a challenge. I don't have a magic answer for you, other than acknowledge that's a tough one, and we just have to, again, band together and be compassionate about people who are less fortunate.
This might be a question for both Steve and Russ. Let's say someone is doing a good job with that equation, that inequality equation throughout their life, more I than E, and so they've amassed a savings when they get into the second middle age, and their financial advisor gets to tell them, hey, if you want to turn around the formula, you can do it. It's going to be okay. You can have more E than I for a while. Can someone that's been having more I than E their whole life and being accustomed to that and living that way, is it okay for them to turn it around? Or can they do it? Like, even when you tell them they can they actually do it? Does that make sense, Steve?
Want me to take that first, or you want to take it, Russ?
Thanks a lot, Steve. Appreciate that. Well, I think part of it, we look at it a little differently. Actually, conceptually the same, but we use what we call a personal funded ratio, which is all your current assets, basically, and then what you have coming in. It might be Social Security or pension, whatever it is. It's not technically an asset because you can't sell it. And on the other side, what we talk about are what we call claims as opposed to expenses, because you might have your essential expenses, and that's what Steve's using in there. And then you have things that, for example, you might want to help your kids and things like that that are not really liabilities, but they're things that you want to spend on. Those are the things that you can modify. That's not really the I and the E. So in fact, there are times if your personal funded ratio is very positive, not just one, in other words, equal, but you have a lot more resources than claims, then yes, you can spend more than you're taking in an income. Because income isn't everything. But you have to be careful how you use those words, because he's using them a little bit differently.
Right, and actually when I say retirement income, that can include withdrawals from principal, which some people don't include in the definition of income. So I often use the word cash flow. What is your cash flow that could work for the rest of your life? We start getting the technical words and get confusing. So Russ is absolutely right that you need to use your terms carefully. I do want to comment on something you said, is that if you've been disciplined and you've got a lifetime of saving, it can be tough to turn that around as you reach retirement, because you're used to saving money and it just doesn't feel good, maybe, to spend these savings. And so that's a mindset. And I think what you want to do is be able to feel comfortable spending your savings in a way that is responsible. And so when I talk about I as income, I'm talking about drawing down your savings in a responsible way that might last the rest of your life. And so that's part of the I there. Beyond that, I can say spend time thinking about it, and just make sure that you can generate cash flow either from your interest and dividend earnings, an annuity if you buy one, Social Security, systematic withdrawals from your principal, but just make sure it lasts, or is supposed to last, the rest of your life. And then you might feel comfortable then spending that cash flow.
Hi, I have a question about savings rate. So if you were talking about wanting retirement at 70 or 80% of what you're used to having while you're working, what kind of, starting at 20s or 30s, do you think you should be saving? 10%, 20% of after-tax earnings? What's the number that gets you to that 80% living a lot longer?
Okay, good question. For those of you who couldn't hear the whole thing, is that what percent of pay should you be saving? There are studies out there, and you have to make all kinds of assumptions about what you're going to earn. But just to give you a ballpark, there's this number out there, 15% of pay. You know, if you started saving that at age 25 and you saved for 40 years to age 65, you might be okay. Now, what percent of the population is saving that? Very little. And as you can imagine, this saving rate, the later you start saving, the higher it gets. And there's tremendous leverage if you want to retire at 65, but if you want to retire at 70, then that saving rate goes down. And so what I say to people in their 20s and 30s is mainly, you know, save as much as you can. Make sure you're doing other things with your life, like starting out a good career. Maybe if you're building, if you've got a family, you want to, you know, buy a home or build your nest. These are as important, I think, as starting as saving. So, but these are tough questions, as we were saying earlier. There's not a unlimited amount of money for younger people to be able to save and get their career off to start and build their nest. And so I guess the encouragement is just do the best you can and then be prepared to adjust your plans as you get older.
I'd add the comment, be careful of negative savings. We call it student debt. I mean, that's a decision that people have to make, but how much money do you spend if Steve's point is that you have to have a good job to have money to save? So are you going to borrow a lot of money if your goal is to go to a low-income occupation, which might be a perfectly noble thing to do, but then don't borrow a lot of money to go to school to do that, because that's negative savings that you have to overcome. Yeah.
I noticed that you recommend annuities, the use of them. I've heard two schools of thought on that. Can you share the reasons for using annuities and maybe top reasons for not?
Okay, thanks for that question. That's one of the most interesting questions.
We have a 3-hour session here.
I wanted to say a few things. Is that the term annuity is a very confusing term, and it's got a lot of bad connotations. And there are annuities out there that are sold by brokers that are high cost and have all kinds of bells and whistles. And there are even very famous people who say, I hate annuities. You know, my view is like saying, well, that's like someone saying, I hate pickup trucks. An annuity is just a tool, and there are good annuities and there are not good annuities, and our job, if we want to use annuities, is to find the good ones. What annuities can do for you is pay you a stream of income for the rest of your life, no matter how long you live. That can help address the longevity risk. It also can protect against stock market risk. What I do want to say is that Social Security is the best annuity out there. And so before you buy an annuity, you want to take your money and use it to optimize your Social Security benefit. Then, once you've done that, if you've used your savings to help maybe fund a Social Security bridge payment between when you retire and when you start Social Security, that's the best annuity you can buy. But if you still want more guaranteed lifetime income and that makes you feel good, look for a cost-effective annuity, and they are out there. So I think what I like is a mix of you've optimized Social Security. If you need more guaranteed income, find a cost-effective annuity. But also, you don't want to put all your money in an annuity. You want to have enough money to invest in the market and have some flexibility that you can adopt. So it's really a portfolio approach.
I know at the beginning you said there's a disparity between people who can save for retirement and those who can't. I know sometimes certain people who are, they're thinking about housing and they can't get their basic needs met. What advice can you give to those who do want to save for retirement, but they're at the age where they're still trying to get their basic needs met?
That's a tough one. I mean, there's not a magic bullet I can give here other than do find some way to save some money if you can. And what we're finding is if you have a job that has a work-based savings plan where you can automatically deduct the savings from your paycheck, that is great. That's one of the best things you can do for your financial security. And then beyond that, it's just balancing saving with building the rest of your life and building a home. And there's not a magic bullet for that, but it's just that's the challenge to try and balance. It's getting kind of late, and I see folks.
I think you ought to give us your ending remarks.
So thanks for sticking around. And this, I know it's getting late. It's a little past 8:30. But what I've talked about is a lot of effort. And why do we want to go to all this effort? Well, you get to your 60s and 70s, and a lot of us have unfinished business. And this is your last best chance to get at that unfinished business. You might have a bucket list. You might want to travel. You might have hobbies. You might have causes that you want to take up. You might want to save the world. I mean, actually, the boomer generation, as we entered adulthood, we wanted to save the world. Then we raised families and got our careers. So now's the chance to actually get back and help save the world. Maybe you can make a difference in your family or your communities. You can connect with loved ones or friends that you haven't seen in a while. These are all amazing things that now is the chance to do that. And so it is definitely worthwhile to make a difference in either your community or your families, your lives. This is the reason you want to do that. And you want to build the financial support, the health support, and the social support to do all these things. I want to end with a picture of my father. I think this is a good picture, which is a metaphor for living the rest of your life. And so here's a picture of my father. He's the one on the left. He was in his late 60s when I took this picture, and he was a wonderful inspiration to our family. He was healthy, and he was vital. And I think this is a good metaphor for living the last years of your life, because we're going to face challenges. We're going to have maybe some health issues. Maybe the market's going to crash. We might have illnesses in our family, and our friends and family might pass away. We're going to have hurdles in the last part of our life. Think about a runner or hurdler who said, you know, I would have won if it weren't for all those hurdles in the way. It's just part of the landscape that we're going to have to face some hurdles. Now, my father trained for his events. He prepared for them. He just didn't go out and run them. And so I like to say that we need to prepare for our retirement and running our retirement race. And so I hope I've given you some insights and some inspiration that'll help you win your retirement race. Thank you very much.
That's it, folks. They turned off my mic. No, they didn't, but thanks very much.